Let's get back to that story involving Tesla and the acts of vandalism toward the company. Attorney General Pam Bondi calling it a wave of domestic terrorism, saying defendants will face, quote, the full force of the law. Criminal defense attorney Peter Elikann now joins me. Peter, I want to ask you, what does that really mean to be charged with domestic terrorism, and what these defendants have been charged with? Is that an actual charge that would work?
There's a difference between just plain old vandalism. You get charged with vandalism, but when it's vandalism with a political motivation behind it, you're trying to influence the government or influence people, all of a sudden you're in a whole new world. It's no longer the charge of vandalism, which would still be bad, but it's much worse, domestic terrorism. So it's not exactly the act that you do, but the idea of your thinking behind it, in the same way that we have had hate crime legislation. You punch somebody and you get charged with assault and battery, but if you punch somebody and yelled out a racial epithet or an anti-Semitic epithet, suddenly you're not only charged with assault and battery, you're charged with a hate crime. And so it really is the motivation and the intent behind your act.
Peter, I think that we've seen these play out in places. Primarily, I've seen like on the West Coast. What are you seeing there, like in New England? Are you seeing anything like this happening where you are?
Not on those levels at all. Certainly, people are talking about Tesla an awful lot, but I don't think we've had the volume and the of actions that we've seen in other parts of the country yet. But I don't know why it would be limited to one particular part of the country. We could certainly, there's a fear this could be anywhere.
I feel like sometimes weather plays a part, that people are just more active in warmer climates. And since Boston hasn't really turned yet, I think that sometimes it can be a little too cold to demonstrate and participate in things like this. But Peter, when we see something like this happen, is it escalated because of the focus of the federal government on these crimes?
Yes, it is. And I don't think any side of the political spectrum, I don't think anybody's in favor of this kind of throwing Molotov cocktails at private corporations, companies. So you don't really have, there's really no sympathy for these kinds of actions. But more than ever, the government seems to be more motivated, because we've had domestic terrorism before. There's most of it has been far-right groups, white supremacist groups. Even in the 1990s, there was what we call eco-terrorism. So it has been from both sides of the spectrum. And there's actually no particular legislation. There's no federal law about domestic terrorism. And some people are calling for it now. But regardless, if they're prosecuted at this point, they could face anywhere from 5 to 20 years. And certainly their punishment would be greatly enhanced by the idea that there was a political motivation behind these acts.
And Peter, I guess the obvious question is, why is this considered domestic terrorism and not just an act of property damage?
Well, as I said, it's the motivation behind it. Normally, you do vandalism and you get charged with vandalism, destroying property. But when they can show that there was a political motivation, that you were trying to influence the government or people, and you're doing it for a philosophical, ideological reason, then that's what takes it out. It's the thinking, it's the intent, it's the motivation behind the crime, not just the act itself, but the reason for the act is that it suddenly goes from just plain old vandalism, which would still be bad, into domestic terrorism, which is so much more serious a crime.
And Peter, was the president right? Could you get as much as 20 years for something like this?
Technically, you can. Under the statutes, I think they figured out it'll be anywhere between 5 to 20 years, depending on sentencing guidelines and a whole bunch of complicated stuff. But that would be the very max they could give somebody for this.
Peter, I have to tell you, I've been watching you for a while now when I go see my family in Dorchester. So I see you all the time there. You stay warm there in Boston.
Will do. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Hope to have more friends.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.